I spoke to the sky. I remember going out at night in our backyard in Syracuse, where I was studying at the time, and looking up at the stars and wanting them to see us, not to save us. I said, please see us, to see what happens to a planet when we haven't learned how to love each other. If we could be useful in that way, just in that way, it would make it so much easier to bear. It would, that we could become an object lesson for the universe, or at least our part of this galaxy. Don't you think? Wouldn't it make it easier? I'll talk about the Great Turning. First, however, what I saw was essential from the dark night, that people are highly defended and unable, many of them unable to express their feelings, and even the knowledge that would trigger those feelings that could touch on loss of optimism, that would, because especially in America, that the successful person is confident and smiles a lot and feels that you has an answer for any problem or discomfort. And so what happened to us, the whole, everyone in this time, and it's a time when we have split the atom, and so all of nature seems to be coming unglued, and we're unglued even from our alleged purposes, that we need to come to wake up to what is. But people are afraid to say things that will demonstrate anything of their panic and feelings, that we might not make it. So that's what you really lock up and cover it over. So, and if you try to tell them, don't you realize that we have 50,000 nuclear warheads on the hair trigger alert? Don't you realize that we have acid rain? There's the environmental organizations were delivering information, assuming that they could stir or scare people awake, and was having the opposite effect. So I began to experiment with meditation. Now just be with our breathing. Notice how you're being breathed. The larger body here is breathing. Now, and using various approaches to soften and help people speak from within, and not listen to anything, not tell them, but just, and I realized in this that the voice people most need to hear, back then in the 70s and now, is the voice from within. Because the voice within wants to live. And we cover it over with various forms of distraction and addiction. So that was the beginning of it, and that was, I called it, we found that once people shared what was happening for them as they looked at the world, and there's the ways you can help people do that. They need each other. one-on-one isn't nearly as good as having a group. They fall in love with each other and with life. Something is released in them and interpreted to them and help them see that this is not craziness. It's not because they're a failed person, but because they're alive. And it's because they care. And it's because actually they love this world. So to deliver people, to help them speak their anguish. I remember when the first article about it came out, the French translation in Paris in a journal was Travailler avec l'angoisse planétaire, working with planetary anguish. That the living planet itself is in danger, that the forests are being clear-cut because of the way we are seeing life, or the way we're feeling life, and that's down here too. Opening to speaking on behalf of life. And so the sense of a turning from simply being passengers on this ball circling the sun to being this larger living, exquisitely beautiful and wise, and that this being a moment in our evolution of being here on behalf of life, letting life itself work through us, feeling that support, having the work help people see their real identity. So it was like an awakening to one's true nature. And so we began, sharing the exercises and practices are so important. You don't read your way to this nearly as quickly as engaging and role-playing, and role-playing other critters, and role-playing future beings and ancestors, and realizing that we are so much more than our identity here and now. So much more than a farmer or environmental this or that, fight. But you are, it's all there. It's all there, the past and the future, as well as what's happening on the planet now. Well, waking up to the danger, waking up to our belonging to Earth, to our true identity as Earth, at the very moment when our species is seeing that we're killing the life on this Earth. I bet you felt that too with the awakening this, several. Thanks a lot. I discover who I am only when I see the omnicide that's happening. So always when we teach, it's the gift of not trying to give any answers or outcome, but being held in uncertainty, strengthened by uncertainty, staying in the moment, and seeing that there's and the worldview that was the most useful was to see the three stories, as we call them, being enacted now. There's the story of corporate capitalism, but we decided to call it the Industrial Growth Society because it's true for nations and economies that don't like to see themselves as capitalists. They're competing with capitalists in that competition, becoming similar. Then, right from the beginning, the great unraveling. Get used to it. I like that term so much better than collapse, actually, because for systems, That's what systems do. They don't just fall over dead. But they lose their coherence, their memory, their nature. And then the great turning. And always the realization we hold, we don't know which will win out now. It's neck and neck. But what's happening now with this incredible acceleration, and I think that a key factor there is the burning of the Amazon and the massacring of its protective indigenous people. And the law, we cannot make it without the Amazonian rainforest. So the great turning, which is what? It's a transition we're in. We're in it now. It's a transition. We're learning so much in science and in grassroots community building that it's not something we do instead of the collapse. It's something that can guide us through it. So my preposition these days is through. Honey, we're going to have to go through this. But the more we work to lower the emissions of CO2 and methane, the more there'll be left for those who make it through. So then the great turning becomes like Bodhichitta. It's a commitment. It's a vision. Oh, we don't want it to end like this. We don't want our time in this universe as humans, our story to end with this rapacity, this viciousness, this cruelty. We've set machinery in motion that we can no longer control. So it looks like we're going to have to go through it. But by the laws of evolution and positive disintegration, that's what happens. That's what happened for me in my dark night of the soul. I didn't see how I could go on. And I lost a lot of my facile assurances. But during that time, and during this time for all of us, we're coming unraveled. And the old norms, the old codes, the old values and behaviors, we see it doesn't work anymore. It has to come apart. That's true at every single point of evolution. From the very beginning, it comes apart, what was driving you, the identity comes apart, and then new values and norms, you self-organize around them, and you become something with greater capacity and greater sensitivity and a greater reach for dealing with the problems. Yeah. So I see us now, Katie, as in this part, you've gone through it. You've gone through it, and your response right away was to develop and use the skills for bringing people awake. It's exquisite and quick response. There are other things you could have done. You could have had a nervous breakdown. You could have taken to any kinds of addictions. There's so many. You could have gone. And this is what the Industrial Growth Society uses. They use Big Pharma, and they use the American Psychological Association. because I don't want to get upset, and I don't want to get too accusatory here. But that we don't medicate ourselves through this point of evolution. We'd fail. The anguish is necessary because it's your loss of a previous identity and a previous code that worked. And so we're now finding new codes, but we find that that we find them in the new paradigm, the shift of paradigm. There's a lot, so much that can help us reorganize. And that's why this evolution, at every evolutionary point, you have this disintegration, rebuilding, and why Kazimierz Dabrowski in Poland coined the term positive disintegration. We disintegrate in order to become more capable, more realistic, more including the interests of others, etc., etc. So that's the great turning. Yeah, but fear of death makes it infinitely harder to evolve now in this path, because in what disintegrates are all the practices, and for example, and economic, and in the corporations, in the boardrooms, we have to pile it up. We've got to control, put the foot on the accelerator no matter what. Like the oil industries and the gas industries and the very politicians they fund, put it on because we don't want to die. We're not going to, and even so, we're going to. I see the grip that we have on being successful in the old terms, which are still the current terms for so many people, comes out of fear of losing, and that fear of losing is not very different from the great loss. The great loss is fear of losing our life, or losing the life of our that's beating my heart. So we're not very equipped for this point of for this evolutionary moment. I think it is bigger than any that's faced us over the millennia. Because, and what makes it harder is that because it's taking away the very body of Earth. It's contaminating the oceans. The oceans are dying. We come from the oceans. Can we live without oceans? The air is polluted. The soil is going. And we're caught at this moment when we could rise to that. We are deformed by 5 centuries of hyper-individualism through economic competition and through the brainwashing of certain forms of religion for focus on the resurrection of the separate soul, or how individualized religion has become, as well as your economic work for you to get a salary, for you to take care of your family, for you to get a house for your family, a roof over your head. And so we become a lonely, isolated, and also obedient people. We've become a herd. So we spoke of the book Team Human. That is one of many forms, but one of the best for us to see how lonely we've become. I have a friend on death row, and even in our mass incarceration in this culture, what we think the Department of Corrections uses isolation, solitary confinement. What kind of mind would even think of that? So we have to rescue. We're rescuing our planet's life, but we're rescuing each other. We're learning how to love each other. We don't know, but it's there. It's there in us. It's there in our true nature. We can. And I see that too. It makes this a real interesting time to be alive. I want us to, by being fearless today, enlarge our identity. Let us identify, become what in the deep long-range ecology movement called an ecological self, and to look at the forests and the oceans as extensions of our true identity. And there's so much in the spiritual traditions that sings to that, that opens the senses and mind to that. And that we can be refueled already, even in this wounded world. And we can be refueled by each other and their actions. And we can be refueled by the First Nation people and the indigenous ones. And they give me steadiness. I try to stay away from the word hope, because trying to be, that can so easily derail you and pull you out of the beauty and power of the present moment. But the indigenous teachings, do you notice they're being heard now more clearly? More people are listening. It's very beautiful to me, just here in East Bay with the Ohlone people stepping up so strong after all we've done to them, after the betrayals and the massacres. And it's so wonderful to have people there who've lasted through endured through the most vicious, cruel inanities of history, and are there to help us when we listen. Well, maybe I said that the impetus for the Great Turning is like the Buddhist concept of Bodhichitta, the motivation to be with and serve all people. That wider reach for a wider grasp of life, and so that Bodhichitta is pictured as a flame in the heart. And I remember some of my Tibetan teachers saying, "Now, you happy? Don't let it go out. If it's a very big draft, you just shield it with your hands." Oh, so maybe that's what I want in these years I have left, to help people not let that flame in the heart go out. But actually, you know what? I see it burning brighter than ever. I do.
In the face of.
I feel we're beginning to wake up. You have to look. Now, don't try to see it everywhere. And you can feel it. I've worked with death and grief circles and so forth. But when I was in Germany, something happened by reading. It was well, maybe it was not just reading, but there's a novel by Hermann Hesse called Narcissus and Goldmund. Have you read it? Goldmund is an artist and a sculptor. He's a passionate. He couldn't stay confined in the monastery. He went out and roamed through poverty, and there was the Black Death of the plague and everything. And because he wanted to taste life, and he did the whole thing. But he came to conceive of death. You remember that it was this beautiful. He had a Madonna figure that he kept trying again and again with stone and wood to shape how beautiful she is. She's the mother of life, and she became for him the one who would welcome him in death. So from that moment on, that stamped me. And I agree with you that climate change and climate chaos is simply the last manifestation. And it's only now being translated into English, book about the collapse, the most, in a way, sane and grounded, and this is what you need to know, and this is how it happens, is in French, Comment tout peut s'effondrer, how everything can collapse. And that was a good 10 years ago. Only now being translated into English. And interestingly, climate is barely mentioned, because it is, and this is the work associated with Pablo Servigne, maybe you've heard that name, and others in France and Belgium, who with him then wrote a second book called There's Another, Il y a une autre fin du monde. There's another end of the world. I mean, yeah. And that, other words, we can live, it's about living through collapse. And what they use, what's motivating them in their build, the whole thing is there for us in the Club of Rome report, The Limits to Growth, and then 20 years later in the 90s, in books that I use all the time, called Beyond the Limits, how we are on overshoot on every one of the factors that lead us to crash, where we crash, beyond sustainability. We need, and I think that I think there's a good chance because of how rewarding it is to wake up and work together. We've got to start joining hands, even if what you're doing is going with a friend. Always do something together with others, even if what you're doing is going out with 2 folding chairs and a busy street. downtown San Francisco would be great, with a little sign saying, ready to talk or ready to listen. I just heard about that at a big meeting Saturday. Isn't that great? It's whatever you do that it shows, because it's not up to our individual brains. We mustn't wait till we get the brightest idea, but to just connect and find and experience what fun it is.
Come what may.
I think the splitting of the atom, the release of the strongest binding power of the universe, is an event that is far more than political and military. I have come to be convinced that it has in some way shattered or brought a new uncertainty or unglued us in some way. And I have been fascinated. And I was there, so then bringing forth this work right at the time, almost just as it was under Jimmy Carter, but then came Ronald Reagan, and then came the new war makers, and then came the preparations, the actual preparations to annihilate on a massive scale in a war to defeat Soviet communism. And so I could not help but become aware through the work, but also parallel to the work, of the psychology at play. And people's began to speak their dreams and their experiences of this. And so the theme that came out for me was a shattering, and actually my daughter was just going into college, and at Wesleyan University, where she went, I accompanied her to the psychology lectures and she majored in that, and talking with the professor there, he used that term. Because I said to him, I'm interested in the psychological effects of nuclear weapons and the preparations to blow up the world. And he said, come to my. And then he just kept me there for quite a while as to detailing. He said, in some way, my life has been shattered by this. It happens to me frequently, just walking across the campus where everything is normal, appears normal. And then, in a split second, I just see clouds of rubble burning, and then click, click back. So that he said, I feel unglued. And so that's why this term, and it seems to me that this has happened to our culture, that we're unglued from our rootedness in the web of life, the chemicals that we pass and use without testing them, the readiness to contaminate, our negligence around radioactive substances that will last for millions of years. And right up until the 1990s, when I became aware of depleted uranium used in weapons, because we have so much extra of this depleted, quote, depleted, 239 uranium, that you can buy a ton for $1, just get it away, and someone will make weapons out of it because it's heavier than lead, and you can project it farther than any of the other anti-tank artillery. And so then it contaminates. It's an aerosol that enters the air and it blows around, and you can't put it anywhere. So this is a kind of hell realm that came in with this destruction of this releasing this binding power. That power that's released is the strongest because in the nucleus of the atom, it holds the protons and neutrons together. So that holds the world together. And then the electrons circle it. So when you can bombard it and knock off a neutron and release this, so that it's like we're in and I think you could trace a lot of the neurological distress and nerve diseases and our treatment of each other and what we're willing to do to each other. We've had brutality in our species on mega scales before, but this is so containing it seems to be something we could aim to do because it isn't that hard. But the one thing that is needed is what the culture doesn't seem to want to do, is think about it, to look at it. And our government and business will spend gazillions of dollars burying it deep and trying to think about maybe we can shoot it into the sun or what, so that we don't think about it. Well, when you have a problem and you refuse to think about it, it queers up your whole mind. It's as if we are putting away. I must engender a phenomenal amount of displaced guilt. We did role plays of identifying with future generations. And that was the beginning of the seventh generation. That started there, and all the deep time work, which has been, and we should write a book about that, because this role play, this use of our moral imagination, where we go into the future and just without any more equipment than that, you start talking as someone of a future generation or century, and something moves into the psyche. We've experienced that so quickly. I mean, with a couple of sentences, not all this palaver I've been holding forth, just, and then people feel as if there's a dimension of themselves that has the future's already in us. Just like Sister Rosalie Bertel, that wonderful gray nun who was a radiologist, and she was an expert witness at many a trial of nuclear activists. And she said there's every being who will ever live is present here in Earth now. Will ever live in Earth is here now. Where? In our gonads and our ovaries and in our DNA. So somehow I have realized, and those of us doing the deep time practices, that we birth from this, out of the concern for guardianship, so that we give a shit not to contaminate life forever on this planet with depleted uranium that has a half-life of 4.5 billion years. That's longer than the age we impute to the earth. Grown people are actually know this and are making it. So we're really demented. But we can be rescued by deep time as if we could be rescued by care for the future. Now, to realize in a kind of evolutionary step of interrelationship, that's why I'm feeling so energized these weeks right now, to see that what's emerging now is not with everybody, but even if it's just a little percentage of people. You don't need everybody. But that's dawning on people and is sweeping, that I can be part of the great turning, that I can be, and so that I can be a vessel. And I'm a better vessel when I link up with others. It causes me to turn and look at people with love. And it causes me to feel that it actually goes to that part of me and say, that doesn't look only at how terrible things are, but that like every act and thought, as if what people do with courage is like new life being born. Yeah, so it affects, I think, that wonderful through. And I love the reciprocity in it, that just by being, whether it's concern or thanks in relation to life on earth, that is quickened by you receive something. Yeah. So I have been so grateful for this sense of the reciprocity is Earth coming toward us, not just our acting on behalf of Earth, but Earth awakening in us. That, would you let me read a poem on camera?
Please.
I have to go get it.
Okay.
So this is the very first poem of Rilke's Book of Hours, and he wrote it when he was in his very early 20s, and he had just been to Russia and saw a kind of spirituality that was very earth-related. He had just couldn't stand the pious, sentimentalized Christianity that his mother dragged him to as a kid in the churches, and we're having him feel the wounds of the Christ figures. But he went to Russia with Lou Andreas Salome and found this. And so he wrote these. When he came back, it just poured through him several of these poems every day for about 3 weeks. And he's kind of he's in a holy place. The hour is striking so close above me, so clear and sharp that all my senses ring with it. This moment. I feel it now. There's a power in me to grasp and give shape to my world. I know that nothing has ever been real without my beholding it. all becoming has needed me. My looking ripens things, and they come toward me to meet and be met. So the need we see and the beauty we see and are moved toward, it's not just us going toward it up there, but coming toward us, and coming toward us in a way that can enable us and speak through us and sing through us and write through us and connect through us.